Dr. Prashna Samadar. I'll be teaching in the slide the details of the introduction about sports laws and various aspects of sports laws. So, starting with the prerequisites for this slide, we require to understand the basics of sports law. There are certain elements which we need to understand. So there are certain related articles of Indian Constitution which we have to go through if we have to understand the concept and need of sports law in India thoroughly. Secondly, the arbitration mechanism. Basically, the judicial mechanism which has been installed to give redressal or to rather we can say to give proper justice in matter of sports issues. The arbitration bodies has been preferred over any other sort of judicial mechanism. So if we have to understand the sports law and the requirement of sports law in the present context, we definitely have to be very thorough with the arbitration mechanism in and whole. The second thing is a global sports mechanism. Now, sports is something which is been practiced at a global level. There is nothing called Indian or regional or zonal or something which is aloof from different parts of the world. So nowadays, because global sports mechanism is something which every country is looking up to, so for understanding the general introduction of sports law, we have to look into the global sports mechanism. And sports legislation is something which is a part and parcel of sports law. There are various laws and regulations at national as well as international level which has come up from different time to time so as to understand different aspects and requirements of sports law. So to understand the general introduction of sports law, one of the prerequisites of understanding the same is the sports legislations. So the first slide deals with definition of sports. Now we have to understand one thing is that sports in and out is taken out as a very casual concept. Nobody says or nobody has ever thought that we need to define sports in a very serious manner. But when we are talking about the sports in a way to develop a law on it, we need to define it in and out because so as to understand the various aspects and elements which may cover sports. But in spite of all taken effort to define the concept of sports, we can say that there is no universally accepted definition of sports. However, there are various bodies at the same time who have really taken serious effort and have made serious research so as to coagulate different aspects and corners of the sports and to come up with a definition. One of such bodies is the British Council. So the British Council provides that an activity which has the capacity to fulfill some of the following prerequisites could be called as sports. Now the requisites which they have outlined are the physical skill, physical effort, accessibility, strategy, risk and uniqueness. Now according to the British Council, if a person is involved in any of that activity where a person is utilizing his or her own skill, there is some effort which the person is equipping while playing that or while entering into that activity or carrying on that activity. There is some accessibility, like a person who is doing that has the capacity to do that. It's not that the person is crossing their or his or her own capacity, or they don't have the capacity but still they are forcibly doing it. It should not be like that. That means the person who is doing that particular activity has an accessibility to do that. There is a strategy involved. It's not that indolent attitude is there towards carrying out an activity. The person should be very much intended to do that particular activity and utilizing a particular strategy to carrying on that activity. Then there is a risk involved. The risk may be, the level of the risk may depend. It's not that it has to be very, very risky. But there is some risk in the sense that there is some option of that, there's some opportunity to get wrong. So that element should also get involved. And of course, uniqueness. The particular activity must have something different from all other activities. So some element of newness must be there. So if any such particular activity which has the capacity to cover up all these aspects as per British Council can be called as or can be defined as something called sports. Now, after looking into the definition given by the British Council, in this slide we have tried to come up with some of the other definitions which some of the celebrated committees or the charters have given and tried. As I have said in my previous slide that some of the committees, some of the commissions, some international bodies have tried to come up with a definition with a defined purview of sports. So here comes the Australian Sports Commission definition. It says that a human activity capable of achieving a result requiring physical exertion and or physical skill which by its nature and organization is competitive and is generally accepted as being a sports. The European Sports Charter says that sports means all forms of physical activity which through casual or organized participation aims at expressing and improving physical fitness and mental well-being, forming social relationship or obtaining results in competition levels. So what we want to, what we can achieve or what we can understand from all these definitions is that sports is something which of course attracts physical fitness, which of course requires physical skill, and obviously there is some organized activity which is needed to be done to come up with or result which may result up to something called sports. Then there is a requirement of mental and physical well-being, but there are different kinds of aspects which has been reflected in different definition. So we can see after looking into three bold definitions that there is no particular strict purview over which each of the bodies have stuck to. Although the common elements like physical skill, physical exertion, physical newness or mental fitness or mental well-being, physical fitness has been discussed and has been kept constant in all the three definitions which we have discussed. But at the same time, we can also see that there is something called forming social relationship which European Sports Charter has tried to highlight. There is something called nature and organization and a competitive nature which Australian Sports Commission has tried to highlight. There is something called uniqueness, risk associated with that activity which the British Council has tried to stuck to. So that is the same thing which I was trying to say from the very beginning, that although the different global organizations have tried to define sports, but they have some exclusivity in every one of their definition, which makes them distinct from the other. So, and on a whole, we can say that although efforts have been actually taken to define sports, we cannot reach up to a conclusive definition of sports, or an exhaustive definition of sports is still missing. Now in this slide we have dealt with the ambit or scope of sports and sports law. So sports is broadly divided into amateur sports, professional sports and international sports. Now there are two basic concepts, that is sports law or law of sports. Now sports laws are those laws which deal with different aspects and different components of the sports. But law of sports means, because sports obviously include different physical activities, so there are certain rules and regulations through which those physical activities are needed to be conducted. So those rules and regulations are meant as law of sports, whereas the laws and regulations which are required to administer a particular physical activity, whether it is being carried out in a proper transparent manner or not, for that there are different laws, there are different bodies which regulate that. That is the domain of sports law. Now there are two concepts called law of sports and law of games. Law of sports is known as lex sportiva, and law of games is known as lex ludica. So what we are concerned as law students are with lex sportiva and not with lex ludica. Here I am highlighting the needs of sports law, that why we should study sports law. So sports law basically has been established, or it has taken birth, because there are certain aspects which comes very now and then in the domain of sports, and we need to have certain laws and regulations and regulatory authorities which have to look up to, so that the entire sports culture at the global or as well as at the national level may run smoothly. So there are certain exploitation which may happen, exploitation with the players. There may be certain gender discrimination or sexual exploitation which may happen, or there may be certain discrimination in matter of choosing a player and not choosing the other when one may happen. So these kind of exploitations can be avoided if there is a proper law which may attract and prohibit certain exploitation of that nature. Now, anti-competitive arrangements, again, there may be certain, the selection committee may be very choosy, or there may be certain non-transparent practice which may happen. So that can be prohibited if there is a proper legal structure which may attract and prohibit such kind of discrimination. Then there is a very famous concept of doping, which every one of us almost know. So that players take different kind of medicines, and then they indulge into different kind of enhanced practices, and hormonal imbalances may happen, or there is a high adrenaline rush, and then they increase their performance. So that is called doping, which is obviously not correct, and which is against the transparent sports rules and regulation. So that should be stopped, and obviously if there is a clear sports law structure is there, then that can be stopped, or that can be either regulated. Then broadcasting rights, because we know that broadcasting plays a pivotal role in showing and in telecasting the different kind of matches which is happening in one part of the world, and the entire world can watch that. So there are the different aspects of broadcasting rights are also covered under the domain of sports law. Then violence in the sports while playing in the ground, one player may be violent against another player. So the referee has to be there to look into, and obviously referee also has to follow certain rules and regulation, because referee also cannot be the pinnacle of justice in that case. So different violence may happen at different point of time. Outside the ground also there may be certain violence which may happen. So all of that can be regulated if there is a proper law which attract all of this, or which prohibits all of this. Then there is something very famous concept called betting and match fixing, which is involved in sports, different kind of sports, especially in cricket. So and that can be stopped if we have proper laws for that. Then we have sports endorsements, and there are sports sponsorships also. Then we have the concept of ambush marketing, that means marketing on the basis of different brands, and the brands which are not endorsing some of the matches, which are not sponsoring some of the matches, but they are just doing the marketing fakely in name of being the sponsors for that particular match. So there are various aspects which is in regulation to this also, and if we have a proper law with regard to that, we can easily stop that, or we can easily tackle such kind of non-transparency or vicious elements. Then we have the concept of human rights, which is very much important in the context of players also. Players also have different human rights which is involved when they are playing. Their career is very important because their careers are very short-lived. So in that, if they comes into the cobweb of non-human right elements, then obviously it can be tormenting for them. So that can be stopped if we have a well-fashioned law. So this particular slide is a bird eye view about the global development of sports law and sports bodies. So the ancient Olympics is one of the foundation stones of global sports. Here we can see that the ancient Olympic, which started in 776 BC and continued till 393 AD, and was then stopped due to certain internal politics. That is considered as one of the stepping stone into the global sports culture. Then we restarted Olympics ages later. Then we have certain international, very renowned bodies like International Olympic Association, which is one of the biggest global association which deals with international sports and global sports at large level. Then we have GAIFS, that is Global Association of International Sports Federation. Then we have international sports championships like Wimbledon, World Cups and all of that. Then we have one of the very interesting bodies like the establishment of CAS, that is Court of Arbitration for Sports, one of the biggest judicial structure for sports redressal mechanism. Then we have the concept of regional games, like we have Asian Games and SAARC Games and Australian Open Tennis and something all like that. Then the development of international sports like cricket, football, hockey, chess. These are some of the sports which are age old and which have traveled a lot of ups and downs and have come up to the present structure, and is considered as one of those basic sports which the entire globe plays. There would be any country, there would be no such country which would not be involved in all of these kind of sports. So they are known as global sports nowadays, and we have to have a proper legal structure so as to regulate these games and the bodies associated with these games too. And then we have a recognition of sports culture, because sports culture at the early stages, at the stages when Olympic was used to get practice in the initial days, it was just the sports culture was very limited. It was just bits and bits of sports culture in different parts of the world. But as and when time has went on, different kind of sports culture, a coagulated global sports culture is something which everyone is looking up to. So to develop the sports culture, we need to recognize the sports culture also. So that recognition of somewhat law has also recognized that sports culture, because when law is coming up with different legislations or different charter at national and international level, they are somewhat giving recognition to the sports culture. So that recognition is also something which is a development of global sports and law. Then regulating transparency in sports or administration, starting from Olympic to any regional game to any zonal game or to any national game to any domestic championship or something like that. We need to have proper administration, we need to have proper laws, we need to have proper body which take care that whether the game is being played nicely or not, whether the game is being played properly or not, whether something which is illegal, whether something which should not happen ideally is happening or not. All of this is needed to be taken care of. So for that reason, we need to have a proper mechanism and transparency. We need to ensure transparency. This particular slide deals with the hierarchy of sports bodies under global purview. So there are different sports bodies which are dedicated for different purposes. Like we have different self-governing bodies, like we have FIFA, we have UEFA, we have different kind of for example, I have given example of GAISF, Global Association of International Sports Federation. Then we have EU members, then we have different player leagues and all. So these are some of the body. Then we have Olympic Association. So these are some of the global associations who have a hierarchy to be followed. So this is a small example of now there is no strict hierarchy that one is over the other. There is a networking of the hierarchy. So this picture shows or reflects some of the networking of one body with another body. So which can be explained in some of the later lectures also. In this particular slide, the hierarchy, a small bird eye view of hierarchy of Indian sports bodies is also provided. It is same as global, that there is no strict hierarchy that one is above the other, and there is no networking like that, because nowadays it is not that one is a ruler and another is getting governed strictly. So there is something called networking of bodies with one another. At the same time, International Olympic Association also have associations at state level, that means at country level. So that is a different structure which goes hand in hand with the domestic structure in India, which is actually governed by SAI, that is Sports Authority of India. So this particular structure shows a small bird eye view of what is the governing structure of SAI. But in India, there are two parallel systems which run. Unlike in any other country also, there are two parallel systems which run, one under the administration of their Olympic Association and one under the administration of their domestic body. So as in the previous slides, I have covered almost the general introduction of the sports and sports law and what is the need of the sports law. At the end of this presentation, I would suggest that these can be the plausible practice questions which we can ask after the presentation which has been made. So, what is meant by sports? How sports has been defined by the British Council? What is the scope of sports? What is meant by sports law? What are the basic requirements of sports law? What is the hierarchy of international sports bodies and authorities? What is the hierarchy of sports authorities of India? So these are something which some of the questions which we can ask while we can try over certain these concepts which are the very basic concepts of sports law. These are some of the references which I have provided, which I have utilized when I was preparing the slide. So you can also get into these these references. You can go to these links for checking up all updated information of various aspects of sports and sports law. Thank you so much.